Hello and welcome to At the Power Table podcast, where we are building barriers. Oh, we're not building barriers, we're breaking barriers and building the future together. It's clearly been a long time since I've been on the podcast. I do apologize. It's mostly because we were trying to find a podcast studio and trying to find new guests, which we have lined up some really incredible people. So we are excited. Super excited for the next season, and we're going to bring you new voices. One of that new voice is Emma Lamont, Senior Marketing Manager at Energy Voice and Energy Forward. Emma is an absolute powerhouse and has been doing really cool things championing women exposure in the energy industry. Emma and I met over LinkedIn. I just thought she was super impressive, and I was like, oh my God, we have to get her. And then she kindly agreed to do this at pace so that we could get it out for International Women's Day. Happy International Women's Day, by the way. I really hope you're going to enjoy this. I hope this podcast makes you feel more empowered to get involved into the energy industry and make sure that we're giving equitable access and opportunities to everyone in the industry so that we drive the energy industry forward and meet our goals together. Okay, that is it for me. Happy listening. So welcome to At the Power Table, Emma Lamont. It is great to have you here. Emma I have no idea what your role is. I have completely forgotten. Emma works at the Energy Voice. Remind me what your role is.
So, yes, I'm a senior marketing manager at Energy Voice and eForward. And Energy Voice and eForward are part of the publishing powerhouse that is DC Thomson. Many listeners will have heard of DC Thomson through The Beano, a much beloved British cartoon strip. But also Bunkered, Puzzler, Stylist. It's a really old publishing house, 250 years old. Energy Voice and eForward are part of that.
That is brilliant. And tell us about Energy Voice and eForward.
Yeah, so Energy Voice is a reason I got into the energy industry, actually, because I was really drawn to the story that it tells about the energy industry. And it's really well trusted and respected in the sector. And the reason for that is because of the editorial integrity. And the team of reporters we have are just fabulous. They're just so entrenched in the energy community and they're passionate about telling that story. So thanks to that, and thanks to all these amazing connections that they have, Energy Voice is often the first word or the first sort of breaking news in many of these big energy stories that are going on today. And there are so many going on today, aren't there? And then as I joined Energy Voice, we were just about launching a sister brand called eForward. And eForward is really a very purpose-led community for energy leaders. And whilst Energy Voice covers the news, eForward gives energy leaders a place to convene and discuss and collaborate and get their message out around what their organization are doing about the energy transition. So two really interesting brands, both really media-led, and yeah, fantastic place to work for and a really interesting time, I should say, in the energy industry at the moment.
I think one of my favorite things about you is when we had our first conversation, it was almost like having someone hold up a mirror to me, because I think you love the energy industry almost as much as I do, which is really cool. However, you did mention that you're not from the energy industry. Energy Voice is your first energy job in your career.
Yeah.
Tell us about your career and how you got into the industry.
Yeah, no, it is. And if you'd asked me 10 years ago, would you be working in the energy industry? I probably would have said no.
Yeah.
It's funny how life takes you on this journey, isn't it? I've probably had what people would describe as a squiggly career, but I've always been interested in brand and storytelling. When I left school, I did a diploma in advertising, media, and design management, and my degree is in creative writing. So you can see, like, from the get-go, that was always like where my heart lies. But after that, I moved to London. I worked in many industries, film and music and ticketing even. So it was only really when I moved to Scotland that I started working agency side, and that gave me like a really interesting perspective of many different companies and how they present themselves as a brand. And what I noticed was that all the best B2B brands don't treat their users as these corporate bots, because like we're not corporate bots, are we? We're all just people who happen to perhaps work in corporate jobs. So when I was offered the opportunity to work for Energy Voice, which is a B2B brand, I've kind of taken that philosophy with me in, how can we create a brand that resonates with people and that people really want to be part of, and the same with eForward. So yeah, it's really not been a straightforward route into the energy industry for me.
Yeah, I love that. And I really love that's the point around not treating them like corporate bots. I think ultimately it's human connection at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love that.
Given your career and like your background, my personal perspective is always that the energy industry isn't marketed sexy enough. Like,
I
yes,
agree.
cool energy industry. Like, if you're like in energy, nobody reacts the same way, like, oh, I'm in film or I'm in fashion, just because it's just not marketed sexy enough. So, given your expertise, if you were to market, like, what do you think we're missing in marketing the energy industry?
What I find really fascinating about it is the people that you meet in the energy industry. And I think they are what really, as I said to you, 10 years ago, if you'd asked me, like, do you see yourself working in energy? I would have said no, because I probably had that perception of it being quite dry. But actually, when you start working in energy, you meet all these like brilliant, switched on, really passionate people. And I think it's them and their stories, and it's the stories you're telling on this podcast that actually make you sort of buy into that industry, and that's the story of the energy industry. And again, like that's why I was really drawn to Energy Voice, because it's been telling that story for 25 years and it's changed so much, and it's changing every day at the moment. There's so much innovation. And so yeah, I think in my opinion we would tell those people's stories more.
Yeah, I think that's such an
That's what you're doing.
and it's an underrated skill, right? Storytelling. I really wish I was one of those people who could just like captivate people with the story.
You're
If
doing it though, aren't you, through your podcast?
You're so kind. You are a powerhouse on your own, though. So, in addition to Energy Voice and eForward, you're also involved in Women in New Energy and the Women's Energy Network Alliance. Tell us about those.
The Women in New Energy is actually an Energy Voice initiative. So I was introduced to that through Energy Voice. It was an event that we were running just in my first year. The first one of the events I went to, I wasn't really involved in it, if I'm being honest. And I just went along as a delegate, as an attendee, and I was just like blown away by sort of the warmth and energy in the room. And then shortly after that, I was introduced to two women who were involved in the co-founding alongside Energy Voice of the Women in New Energy initiative, Bina Sharma and Annabelle Sal. And they're both really well respected in the Aberdeen energy community. And immediately I was introduced by them to so many like brilliant, amazing women. And I was just, again, just blown away by like, wow, like we have to give these women a platform to talk about their areas of expertise. And I think whilst Women in New Energy will always be a safe space for networking and collaboration for women within the energy industry. And if you come along to one of our events, and you're so welcome to join us, you'll feel that energy in the room. I think what it's slowly starting to evolve into is this place for women to have that platform, and not just women, all diverse voices. And the reason for that is because, working at Energy Voice and eForward, we've put on like really, in my opinion, fantastic events. But often we'll reach out to organizations and ask them to send along a speaker. And often it is a man, and that's not because he's the wrong person to do that job. Often it's because he's really good at it. And it's because he's been doing it for like 10 years and he feels really comfortable on stage. It's not that he's the wrong person, but I think what strikes me is that there's many women out there as well who are also experts in their field and perhaps just haven't had the opportunity to sort of like really, show what they can do. Women in New Energy is about that as well. It's about having those diverse voices on stage and really talking about their area of expertise. And it was really Fina, and actually also my manager Ryan Stevenson, who encouraged me to go for the chair position of Women's Energy Network Alliance. And the reason that we found out about Women's Energy Network Alliance is because they invited Women in New Energy to become a member. And Women's Energy Network Alliance is a network of networks. So it was founded by 9 initial networks who I think realized, there's quite a few women's networks out there in the energy space. But to make real progress, we should all be collaborating because we're all essentially pulling in the same direction for DEI in the energy space. So they formed this network of networks, and that's WENA. And it's a really cool thing to be part of because, again, you meet so many cool people in that network. And all we ask of our network members is just to send a representative to come along, maybe once a month or as much time as they can spare, just to meet with the other representatives and chat and try and collaborate. And it's actually a very useful tool. So, for example, if I am looking for a female speaker for something, I'll often go to that meeting and there will 100% be somebody in that meeting who knows a fabulous speaker whose, particular skill set is ABC. So it's a great network. And, if your listeners have their own DEI network and they want to get involved, they should definitely get in touch because it's free to join and there's really a very minimal ask of anybody.
I love it. It reminds me of an example in my mining days. We used to have a mining town of which there were different mining companies, and in mining you have to give back to the community, part of your social labor plan. So you have to
Great.
do something for the community, and one mine would build a road for the community, and the next mine would come and put fiber cables, and they would dig up said road to put the fiber cables. And so it's not just in competition, it's just you can achieve so much more if you're working together. And I love that concept of Women's Energy Network Alliance of we're not in competition, but if we all moving towards the same direction, there's so much more to achieve together. That's really beautiful.
And I think you're so right. And that's a big challenge for the energy industry in general, isn't it? It's like how you bring community along with you, because I think often the challenges and the solutions when you work in energy feel really clear. But actually taking people along on that journey with you who don't work in energy is certainly a big challenge. So it's like that's a really interesting solution that the mining industry has to that.
Yeah, I think it's also I'm just reflecting on our conversation. There's an interesting tension here. So when you spoke about your experience of women in new energy and that warm energy, and even your experience of the moment you come in, there's always 700 people rushing to be like, oh, you need to do this, you need to do this, and everyone's just trying to empower the next person. And that's been my experience too. So I'm really glad that you've experienced it, but two, also so excited to see it happen for somebody else and know that this is not just my experience, but an energy industry experience. But that then brings attention of, and I think you've mentioned this on one of your LinkedIn posts, of does the energy sector have the right culture to move beyond the numbers? And it comes from a conversation around, yes, we have this great industry and great culture, but we still don't have the numbers we want to see, and we still don't see it in black and white. So there's this tension of, oh my God, amazing, but we're still not getting the impact we want. Talk to me about what your perspective is on that.
Yeah. Oh, it's a really interesting question. Because I don't really have an answer to it, but more that I don't think it's just an energy problem, but a societal one. And, if you think about the fashion industry, for example, where 80% of professionals who work in the fashion industry are women. It's a huge majority. Actually, less than 20% of those people go on to have exec roles. So that's a huge disparity as well. Whereas I think the energy industry tells a slightly different story. And, I try to pay attention to the report that Powerful Women put out every year because it does paint that really interesting picture, but in certain terms, which is data and numbers. And I think, for us at the moment, I think it's about 34% of women are there in leadership and sort of like middle management roles. But again, that only goes on to about less than 20% of women in exec roles. And it should be a problem for everybody, I think, because obviously from an individual personal level, like we all know that having diversity in your senior leadership teams is the right thing because it creates, as you say, those doors open for more people along the way. But also from a business perspective, I think there's a stat, which let me see if I can remember it, is something like teams with diversity at exec level has something like 39% more profitability. So yes, it's a cultural thing, but it also makes sense in terms of numbers. Does the energy have what it takes to move beyond the numbers? I don't know. And that's a question I would love to know the answer to.
Yeah, I think that's the thing about the podcast is we ask the difficult questions that we don't have the answers to, and that's completely
Mm.
okay. I think for me, one of my favorite things about the energy industry is that I'm learning every day. And every day I think I'm realizing, shit, I have no freaking clue what I'm doing or what is happening in.
Can relate to that.
I mean, you have switched into the energy industry, so I can definitely see why you can relate. If there was someone in your position, so someone who has a creative background and was looking to switch into energy, what kind of advice, if any, would you give them?
I mean, I think it's looking for those synergies in a company rather than just a specific, I want a marketing role, I want this. I think Energy Voice and E4 would really appeal to me for the reasons we've discussed. But if you're moving into the energy industry and you're interested in DEI, for example, there are some absolutely brilliant companies out there that have DEI running through their DNA. And also, you don't have to think about it in absolutes because whilst, there are big operators, there are also professional services and, publishing like myself that run very energy adjacent and you get that same sort of exposure to the energy world. So I would just say be open-minded, but try and look for somewhere that share similar values to yourself.
Yeah, I think that's really fitting. And I like the question of like listening to advice. It's kind of brings into the theme this year for International Women's Day, which is on the 8th of March, which hopefully we're going to release this podcast by then. In terms of that theme this year is giving to gain.
Uh-huh.
I quite like that. One of my favorite quotes is by lifting others,
Mm.
which sounds very saintly, but it really is like when you actually think about it, it really is something that's really beautiful. What are your reflections on the theme for International Women's Day this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of touched on it in certain places about, how I've been exposed to people within the energy industry who were very encouraging and pushed me forward, even after only being in the industry for a year. I think, it's encouraging to have people around you who believe in you and want the best for you. And, that's all you can ask of anybody. But, ultimately, like, then you need to sort of almost pay it forward and like, what are you doing for others around you? But I think if everybody's adopting that mentality, then it does feel more community led and we're all sort of looking out for each other. I do think the energy industry does a good job of that. But yeah, I think, that's kind of my reflection on the give to gain thing. I think it speaks for itself. We could all be looking for opportunities for others. Like, do we have a connection with someone and someone who's looking for a role and we connect those two people? Like, it can be as simple as an introduction. We don't all have loads of time to give to, running networks and things. So, what simple app can we do to sort of get involved in International Women's Day?
Yeah, I think also for me, just touching on that point about not everyone has capacity to run a network. I think participation plays a role. So you don't have to run your own network, but you can attend those networking events because everybody has something to offer. And maybe it's not just connecting two separate people, but maybe just placing yourself in those spaces and in those rooms because you have something to offer. So I think that for me is also like giving to gain. There's also partly putting yourself out there because I think like as women, that's something we don't often do too well. Is that
Yeah,
putting yourself out?
totally agree. And I think like, so I was chair of Winner last year, but this year it's moved to a lady called Kritika Bala. And she is such a fantastic person in terms of like, she, if people do put themselves forward, she loves to try and find like an appropriate place that meets their skill set and that they'll feel really passionate and comfortable about. So I think you're totally right. Like on one level, like put yourself forward. And then on the other level, if you're in that position of being able to help people, it's about the generosity of like appreciating that they've put themselves forwards and like how can you best help them. So yeah, I think your philosophy is totally right on it.
I love it. You mentioned earlier when we were off recording, there's a UN theme around International Women's Day. Remind me of it again.
It is. I think it's rights, justice, action for all women and girls,
Yeah, very powerful.
which is very powerful. I think, the Give to Gain, it feels a lot more accessible, but the UN level one feels maybe more like powerful and further reaching in that, it brings to your mind, like it takes you outside of that like bubble that perhaps, I mean, that I'm often in of like working in the UK and what diversity means in the UK, but actually and you'll find this, and you probably find this in your job, like when you speak to people in the energy industry, they've worked all over the world. So that means just something different for every woman and girl all over the planet, doesn't it? And I think the UN led mission or theme for this year, I think speaks to that really well. And, I think it's deeply true of the energy industry just because of what a global industry it is.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like just touching on DEI, like that has been on a journey, especially globally, and building on that theme of the UN's theme, like how do we even in our micro slash our little companies in the UK, even if it is bubbled and not fully exposed, but then also taking those principles and scaling it to global, how do we continue to build and strengthen inclusivity in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. I think the first thing we have to do is not ignore it and think that it's going away, even though there are people out there who would like it to go away. I think, there are people like you and I still discussing it, so it's not going anywhere. I think for me, perhaps and this is obviously typical of how I would think about this, but maybe it needs a bit of a rebrand in like how we think about it and how we discuss it. I think one organization doing this really well is Men for Inclusion. Mark Freed at Men for Inclusion has a really interesting way of reframing DEI to make it more accessible to everybody. So it's not a case of somebody saying, oh, a DEI is not for me. He actually focuses on the I of DEI, which is inclusion. And, that literally means everybody. So, if he's speaking to, a leader, like a C-suite, a CEO or someone, he assuming it's a man can't say inclusion isn't for me because it's literally for everybody. And in that way, I think he's getting more people interested in it and having invested interest in it. And I think maybe in our day to day, we all need to sort of rethink like how we can get people interested in DEI who might ordinarily say, well, that doesn't affect me, so it doesn't matter to me. Like, how can we all be reframing that and rethinking it so that they understand that it does affect them, it affects everybody?
Yeah, I completely agree on the point of a rebrand. Again, it's a similar to the energy industry, right? It just needs to become sexy because you think DEI and it's just like, oh, last item on the agenda, let's just get it through because if we don't, then we look like we're terrible. But like, it's actually really important. And like you said, it hits the bottom line ultimately. So it should be really, really important and not at the bottom of the agenda and just like 5 minutes, like are we hitting targets, not hitting targets? So I think that's really well. I really like the mark in terms of focusing on that inclusion. In terms of any other industries, have you seen them do DEI well? If any examples?
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily think it's an industry thing. I'll give you an example. So, obviously Energy Voice and eForward, we're technically publishing industry. And DC Thompson, we actually have a female CEO and a female deputy CEO. And what I can say about them both is that they're very visible, they're very generous with their time, they're very approachable. And I think as a woman working in that industry, it helps to see other women like that in those leadership roles who are approachable and are generous with their time and are absolutely doing a brilliant job. And those values filter down. But, you know, that's not to say that a man couldn't also do that. I think it's more on the individual. So to give you another example, last year we had Chris O'Shea, who is CEO of Centrica, keynote at our Women in Energy, Women in New Energy event. And that could be a bit controversial to have a straight white man keynoting at a diversity event. But I think, he's so passionate about DEI and he also embodies those similar values of being like very approachable, like, very down to earth, generous with his time, and easy to talk to. And I think, being that he's so passionate about DEI, all of that filters down, and Centrica is like, it's held up as a really great place to work for things like parental rights. So I think it's less about what we can learn from a specific industry and more what we can learn from individuals in leadership positions and how we can sort of hold them up as like good examples to follow.
I love that. I love that in terms of like bringing out those leadership skills because you're right, it does filter down and ultimately
Mhm.
makes what makes a good organization. I love that conversation. I love that thought. In terms of like just switching more to a bigger industry perspective. So this doesn't have to be DEI focused. It can be DEI focused if you want it to be. But if you were to redesign the energy industry in the UK from scratch, no limitations. So you have no policy limitations, no money limitations.
Wow.
You can do whatever you want to. This isn't an ideal, perfect world. What would be the things you would change?
Well, I mean, like if it was a perfect world, it would probably put me out of a job because energy news is constantly changing. But I think probably it would be infrastructure. And I think it's the infrastructure that's kind of been the challenge in what we're calling a just transition. So both in terms of like the transition of energy, like obviously there are so many conversations going on about the grid at the moment and the challenges around that in the transition, but also in terms of to get there and to get to net zero 2030, we need a lot more diversity of talent and expertise because there just simply aren't enough people out there who hold probably what we'd think of as a traditional energy type professional. So there needs to be a lot more diversity of thought in that just transition. And I think so infrastructure of culture as well as infrastructure of like, the grid equally would play a part in my perfect world.
I love that. That's a really, really brilliant answer. And I think it's about looking at how do we create that access and opportunities for people who don't necessarily have
Yeah,
a
exactly. And that is the challenge. And I think energy is I think opportunity is the right word because there are so many avenues into the industry, and you don't necessarily have to go and get a master's. You could take an apprenticeship and end up at the same place. So I think it does, like, there are so many avenues and so many opportunities within the energy industry, but it's just making sure that there are these role models up top that embody that, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I definitely think opportunity is the most perfect word because, like, within such a special time, redesigning the grid, moving to renewable energy, it's definitely now that is like opportunity as is at its ripest. I cannot speak. I'm so excited. um, thank you. This has been a really beautiful conversation and so insightful just in terms of bringing together what it means to be a woman in the energy industry, what it means to be someone who's driving change, someone who's making an impact. So thank you for your time.
My
Final
pleasure.
question. My final question is, knowing what you know now, I know you've said 2 times now that if we asked you 10 years ago if you'd be in the energy industry, the answer would be a solid no. But knowing what you know now, what advice would you give a younger version of Emma who's at the start of her career?
I mean, actually, I might tell her to go immediately into the energy industry because like I can see now what doors it opens, and it gives people this chance to travel the world with their careers, and who wouldn't want that? But if I was to be more pragmatic and knowing what I know about myself, I would probably just explain that every single job that I've had in my squiggly career has been an opportunity to learn. That doesn't necessarily mean like learn a new skill, although in some places you will, but in some places that's meant learning something about myself, and maybe that's like a boundary that I have or something that I really look for in a place of work. And I think it's those learning that you pick up along the way of your career that actually, shape you into the sort of professional you become. There's no wrong career path to take, is there? It's just, making sure that you have the awareness to see the things that you've picked up and benefited from and learned about yourself along the way. So I think that is what I would tell a younger version of myself.
I love that. I love it so much that I know I said last question, but I just have to ask the question. I love that you included the point around learning about the boundaries at work, and I think that's something we don't talk often about. Tell us
Yeah.
if there's any, like, if you're comfortable sharing, firstly, any recent boundaries or even one that you remember that was so important for you and still plays a role in your career today.
I think it's more things that I look out for culturally, where in the team that I'm going to be a part of. And I think I'm very aware now of where my boundaries are. So I would look for a team that I know would respect them or fit in with my own values, because I always say you have to spend so much, you've only got one life, right? And short, but we have to spend so much of our time at work.
Yeah.
So, I guess one of my boundaries is if I've learned if I start a new role and I get a sense within a few months that I'm not happy, or like I'm like don't feel like it's the right fit for me, and that might be nobody's fault, it might just be a wrong fit, then I don't have any problem moving on. And like I don't have any problem saying like, you know, like let's respectfully part ways. It's no fault, it's just a bad cultural fit. And I think, one thing that I love at my job at the moment is it does feel like DC Thompson is an absolutely lovely place to work and very respectful of its staff. And that's part of the reason that I like my job so much, is because it's this really nice good fit culturally for me. So yeah, I think hopefully that answers in a roundabout way.
Giving people the power and confidence to change if you don't like something. Again,
Yeah.
elevated conversation. And always a good reminder if it is something that you have come across before.
Yeah, absolutely. And then have you had a similar experience yourself in your
I do.
career?
For me, I have learned over this past year or so, the perception of chasing the next big thing or the next promotion or climbing the corporate ladder is almost fading. I really value doing cool work and doing
Yeah.
cool work, but at the same time, I also really value living my life and being with people and socializing and taking time to look at the sky and doing absolutely nothing. There's lots to unlearn and relearn in that mindset of like, am I chasing? If I'm not chasing, does that make me like lazy? But there's lots for me to learn and unlearn in terms of what does this mean for me? How do I shape my career in one that's perfect for me?
Yeah, I love that. And I think I can see that it's a cultural shift going on at the moment. And I think more and more people are starting to think that way. And like, I mean, I think it's a great way to think. So yeah, I love that for you.
Thank you. Well, thank you again for this conversation. It has been absolutely brilliant. I can't wait for everyone to listen to it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Emma.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
What an absolute powerhouse Emma is. It just goes to show that you don't really need to be an engineer or have an energy technical background to be in the energy space and to be making real positive impact. The energy industry needs people from across all different spheres and walks of life and different careers. So definitely a nudge for you if you are thinking of joining the energy industry. It's a brilliant place, so please do join us. We hope you enjoyed that almost as much as we enjoyed recording the conversation. And as always, please like, subscribe, follow at the Power Table Podcast. Let us know what you think. We love engaging you. So let us know what you think, what you want to hear more of, what you don't want to hear of. And if you have any thoughts about the episode, please let us know. Okay, bye.